Welcome to November 2025's deep dive from Optionality, this month in video format. And this represents the end of November, where the theme was our wisdom exchange. All month long, we have tried to introduce you to and help you learn from some of the amazing Optionality premium members and partners that we work with and are in community with every day. And just to give you a taste of the kinds of quality conversations that we have in the Optionality community, which can be found at optionality.life. So I want to briefly introduce you to the four speakers who are going to be sharing your wisdom in this deep dive about storytelling, narrative arcs, and both the creative aspect of it, but also some of the commercial aspects of it. So we have Britt Bravo. You can find her at brittbravo.com. And she is a big vision consultant. And she also is someone who helps with copywriting and messaging for both individuals and organizations. We have Jen Graybeal, who is mostly known as an editor and development, a person who works in development with authors, particularly in the romance genre, which, as she will point out, is the number one genre and has been for years in America. So she is just an expert, not just on how to craft a compelling story, but also on the business of getting that compelling story published and sold. We have Hwang Lynch, who is she is both a journalist and a communications professional. She is the communications director for a nonprofit, but she's also a freelance writer. She's also working on a memoir. And she really brings her own journalistic spin to thinking about writing in general. And finally, we have Eunice Brownlee, who is, she is a storytelling expert, in particular about how to take your story and bring it to a keynote talk. She's a speaker coach and a speaker development coach. And she has this fantastic Saturday morning newsletter series where she takes a moment in well-known pop culture and breaks down the narrative arcs. And, I love pop culture and the lessons we can learn from it. So that is right up my alley. Each of these four people that I interviewed for this deep dive had so much to say. And so we did try to capture the essence of what they had to say, but there's so much more. We will share their links in the show notes. You should check them all out. You should subscribe to their newsletters. You should follow them on social because they are really the rock stars of this topic. And this topic is not just about writing a book or writing a story or writing an article. It's about writing your story. And in this job market and in this world of AI slop and AI filtering, knowing how to tell your story for whatever reason you may want to is really important. And so we touch on that too. So thank you so much for joining us. And I hope you will really learn a lot from Britt, Jen, Grace, and Eunice. So I always start, as anybody who's watched me interview anybody knows, I like to know a little bit about people's origin stories. And today we're talking about storytelling and narrative and big ideas. And so I'm curious, when you first became aware that you loved writing or reading or telling stories, like when did that become part of Britt and what she was about?
That's a great question. No one has ever asked me that before. So I'm
Really?
like, hmm. I think probably pretty young. One of my favorite books growing up was Harriet the Spy, which anybody who's read Harriet the
Yeah.
Spy knows she was an only child. I'm an only child. And she had a notebook and she went around and she wrote down everything about what everyone was doing and she kept a journal and, you know, spoiler alert, at the end, she becomes the editor of the school newspaper. And I too, because of Harriet, would carry a notebook around and write. I'm an only kid. There's nobody else to talk to. Like, let's say we were out to dinner, we're on a family trip. It's me and my parents, and I'd be there being like, I am observing, this person over here, so on and so forth. So, and Harriet wanted to be a writer. So I would say that was probably one of the first. And even before that, when I went was like 6, 7. I was lucky enough to be in classes that had a lot of writing and a lot of like, write whatever you want. And then you could tell the stories to the class. And I remember I wrote a whole series about my gerbils, again, only child with gerbils, Flopsy and Mopsy, and I drew the pictures and I would tell the whole sagas, and there was just one after the other after the other. So probably started pretty early. I just thought it was, yeah, kind of magical and just seemed like the best thing ever.
That kind of brings me to one of the things. So I've been a writer for as long as I can remember. I actually found my old sixth grade newspaper articles that I was writing on, which
Wow.
this should shock nobody who knows me, where I was writing about the books that I was reading. And so it's just so funny because I think back and I'm like, wow, I really have been a writer my whole life. But back in 2021, I started participating in the New York City Midnight microfiction challenges. And
Oh,
I have never identified myself as being a fiction writer on any level. I've always written personal essay. But here I am doing these challenges and I'm writing these fiction stories. And here I was
wow.
thinking, I don't know how to do this. And the very first one I did, I placed like eighth place in the first round, which I just couldn't even believe because out of like 75 people that were in my heat. So for anybody who's not familiar, New York City Midnight Microfiction Contest, they assign you a genre and then two other pieces of information that have to be included in a story. And then depending on the competition, you have anywhere from a week to 24 hours to write this story. And so here I am thinking about like, I don't know anything about sci-fi. So I would actually spend a few hours of my 24 hours researching like what makes a sci-fi story versus a rom-com or whatever. And so it was really that kind of like cross functional training, for lack of a better term, that really got me into identifying how do we tell story and how can we learn from that in other ways. And that was actually that plus my friend with her analogous thinking plus my friend with her writing cohort, all of those things combined, I was like, I can talk about storytelling and pull that into public speaking because the best public speaking is anchored in really good stories. Like all of
Right.
the most incredible keynotes I've ever heard, they were all anchored in very beautiful personal stories. And so if we can be better at telling stories, our talks become more memorable. And when our talks are more
Wow.
memorable, people remember who gave the talk and then they call us and hire us for things. So
Yeah.
it's all connected and it's been so much fun to just play around with words in a less traditional way, more
Yeah.
traditional. I'm not sure. I guess it depends on who you're talking to.
Oh my gosh. Yes, I was absolutely a little bookish girl. 100%. Um, I was one of those kids that I'd read all the books in the classroom. And so the teacher, when it came to be reading time, would send me to the library. And let me just say, shout out to all the school librarians out there. They have a very special place in my heart. And so when the librarian is sort of walking me around the library, we're trying to find something else for me to read. She We got to talking about how books come to be on the shelf. And in, childhood parlance, it was something to the effect of, well, authors write the books and then they send them to an editor. And then there's editors who read the books and they get to decide which, if they're really good books, then they go on the shelf. And if they're not good books, then they tell the author how to fix them. And I just kind of got real stuck on that concept that there was a job where you read books. That's a job.
Yeah, totally.
And let me tell
You didn't
you,
get paid to do that? What?
there was some direction to my life at that point. So like most people, I kind of did a lot of other kinds of things, and a lot of the publishing industry was located in New York,
Mm.
and that's not where I lived, so it wasn't my space. And so when I in my professional life, I started off in corporate communications. So I did corporate communications in Silicon Valley for about 12 years. Worked at big companies and small companies, did executive ghostwriting, and particularly at the smaller companies, ended up doing things like investor relations communications and internal communications. And we have a company with employees in 40 different countries. How do we communicate with all of them? How do we, that type of thing? How do we tell stories? To come back around to that, how do we tell stories that are important to people in so many different roles and in so many different levels of the company?
Mhm.
So I did a lot of that for a long time. And then when I left the corporate world and I was kind of looking for something else to do, I came back around to this idea of publishing. I knew that self-publishing had really taken off and there were a lot of people doing that. And so I spent about a year sort of looking at the market and the trends and what was happening in that industry and figuring out where was a place for me to start off. And I started off with business books, have it coming from a corporate environment. I was like, oh, so I did business books. I did one about angel investing and cold calling. That was an interesting book to do. And then I visited with some various publishing groups and writing groups that were around, and I found the romance writers. And what I absolutely loved about the romance writing group was the business mindset that these women had, where they were tracking market trends, they were tracking all of the little tiny elements of what makes a story bingeable, what makes
Hmm.
people want to buy not just one, but 10 books. And how do you keep them interested and engaged and keep the story fresh and different while delivering on what the customer expectations are. And it was that business mindset that just really spoke to me. And I wanted to figure out how to work with folks and how to help them out and how to help them to tell their stories, not only in terms of, what ended up on the page, but when I started helping them with the words on the page, it quickly became, now I have words on a page, I have a product, I have a book I can hold in my hand. Now what? Right?
Hmm.
And when you are a solopreneur, you have to think of the whole, all of the different things that go into putting a product on a shelf, putting a product in front of a customer. And we think about having, oh, I'll just put it on Amazon and people will find it. Well, there's literally 1,000 to 1,500 new romance novels every single week on Amazon. So it's very difficult to be able to stand out. It's very
Wow.
difficult to be able to connect with people. And so all of this comes back around to how do you do that and how do you make those connections and how do you make people want the product that you've created, this product that comes from your heart.
Hmm.
Um, I'm Hwang Lynch, and I am a writer and a journalist and a communications professional. And I guess I've always been attracted to storytelling. I was one of those people who wrote stories in a notebook as a kid, and then that led to joining the high school newspaper. And in college, I bounced around a lot of different majors. I thought I was going to be pre-med. My parents kind of gave me a little bit of like prompting in that direction. And I tried to go down that route. It wasn't really something that made me very happy. And then at one point, my dad pulled me aside and basically said, I don't think this is for you. And you've always really enjoyed writing and being on the newspaper and doing speech and debate in high school. And why don't you pursue that as a career? And that was an amazingly freeing moment for me, to be seen as like, somebody, my parents seeing my natural wiring. And that really, set me in the direction. But at that time, I actually didn't really totally know what I wanted to do in my life. So I knew that I was interested in journalism. I took some classes and I moved around and, took jobs in small towns like you do when you're starting out in journalism, and really enjoyed storytelling, but didn't totally enjoy some of the other like stress and stuff that came with the job. Um, and then so later in my a little bit later down the road, I found myself as mostly a stay-at-home mom, and I was also wanting to dip my feet into the work world, and was able to connect, just through my different through a lot of different people I met, just connected with people. Maybe they had a small business or they worked for a nonprofit or something. And there were always people out there who were needing things written, or like, oh, I'm not good at writing and I wish someone could do this for me, because they just want to do the work that they do. And they don't really know how to like market themselves or write about themselves or get attention. And I was like, I know how to do that. And, so then I started picking up small clients and working with a lot of different organizations and people. And around that same time, that's also when I started dipping my toes into blogging, and that's how I met you, Elisa, through blogging. And to me, that was just a perfect outlet where I could do the things I liked to do, and tell stories and go and ask people things, and get access to events and places. But I got to choose. I 100% followed the things that I was interested in, and really led me to see that the things that I had learned how to do earlier in my career and schooling were really, they were actual skills, even though like they're kind of regarded by a lot of people as maybe not as official as if you were like a doctor or an attorney or an engineer, but there are so many ways and so many needs for people to be able to understand what it is they're doing, and to be able to succinctly tell a story that is something understandable to people outside their world, that they can take an interest in and really really get to know.
What is ground zero for creating and crafting a story? Where should we begin?
That's a great question. I think if you're not writing, let's say, a fiction story, and most of these examples are things that are, going to be, they're mostly nonfiction consumed, whether it's online or a book or a talk or things like that. For me, ground zero is actually your audience. Because we all have tons of ideas, but they're not all for the same people. And I think, especially for people who have a lot of ideas, it's knowing who is the audience that you want this to be for, and making them really real, right? So there is no everybody. I often use an example when working with people who say that their work is for everybody. That even if you look at, I mean, there's no O magazine anymore, but when there was an O magazine, which was sort of like a very, very popular, I think of Oprah as everybody. If you looked at, for example, their ad sheet, and they had very specific demographics. It was not, hey, your ads will be good for everybody. No, it was like, it was these people. And so I say to them, here's the most famous person in the world, but their stories were for very specific people. So I feel like that's one of the core pieces, is who is this for? What is the either curiosity or need or interest that this fills for them? Because especially in this world where there is so much content,
Yeah.
and people are constantly talking about how busy they are, you really need to understand where this piece fits in that world. Or let's say you're writing an op-ed, then it's the audience of, who are the editors there, both who are the people making the decisions about it, and then who are the people who are going to be reading it. So for me, that's really the ground zero, is getting a great understanding of who might be reading this, and what would make them pick it up, and then also what will make them pass it on, whether that is an online article or a book, because that's going to give whatever you're doing the greatest traction.
In writer circles and in speaking circles, we say this all the time, is the more specific and detailed you can be with your story, the more universal it becomes. And I still haven't understood why, But I have found that to be true over and over and over again, that I can speak directly to my lived experience. And if I do it well, even if somebody has no idea what it's like to be me or be in my shoes, they can still pick up some empathy, and they can resonate, and they can connect that with a part of their own story.
There's a great lesson that I give in some of my workshops about the creative process. And the creative process, step one is this is awesome, right? You get that spark, that idea of what it is that you want to write, and you're so excited about it, and there's full of possibilities. And then step two is, oh, this is hard. This becomes hard, right? To really flush things out and be able to have something that you can present. To write 5 pages is one thing, to write 50 pages is a whole different thing, and to write 300 pages, right? Those are very different activities that of how you get a story onto the page and how you get a book completed. You've written a book, you know. And so and then somewhere in the middle we get to, oh, this is terrible. And then, and this is the challenge, and this is what's really difficult for anybody that works in the creative field, but also in other fields as well, is that when something becomes challenging and difficult, we start to feel like we're terrible. I'm the problem. I'm not the person to tell this story. I am clearly not smart enough, organized enough, motivated enough, whatever it is, that I am the problem, and we turn that on ourselves. And then but I want to point out that that is a normal part of the creative process where you feel like you've kind of made a mess of the whole story. And that is when you have to figure out how to keep going. And this is one of the conversations I have with a lot of authors. This is why I talk about mindset so much. But you have to keep going, because if you keep going, eventually you're going to come back around to, oh, wait, this is interesting again. And oh, wait, this is great again, right? You will come back around to the this is awesome feeling. And so but you have to go all the way around that mechanism. And honestly, sometimes you go around that mechanism 3, 4, 10, 20 times, depending on how long of a piece that you're writing and how difficult it is.
That's a good question. So, when I sit down to write about something or to tell a story, I'm a big picture person. So I usually am scanning. I'm the kind of person who's kind of scanning the overall lay of the land. And I think that that is a really important part of storytelling, because a lot of people know something really well, and they know like their area really deeply. And I think the benefit for me of being a generalist is that it makes you a really good storyteller, because you're looking for the big picture. I'm looking for connections. I'm looking for things that make me wonder about things. And oftentimes, those are the areas where if you scratch a little bit deeper, you find more connections. And that is often where a story comes out of, like a lot of different facts instead of just like, a bunch of different pieces of information.
But then how do you align that with the idea that, oh, your audience will find you, speak from the heart, and your
Right.
audience will find you?
Yes.
How do you reconcile those?
Yes.
Those seem like opposing thoughts.
Yes, that's an excellent question. So really, I find when working, whether it's organizations or individuals, it's this dance between you and them. So there are people or organizations that are very focused on the other, although I have to say most people and organizations are focused on themselves, but it kind of both. So in general, but there can be people who are like, I don't know if they're going to like this. I don't know if they, so they're so focused on, I got to do something that they will like, or I read an article that says, great online content has these 5 points and I must hit them, so they're like obsessed with what they think other people are going to like. There's that. And then there are people who are like, my idea is so amazing. Everyone's going to love it. Right. So there's these two camps, and it's finding a balance between the two. So in answer to your question, whatever your content story you're creating, you have to be excited about it. Right. You have to, especially if it's something long term, whether it's a series or a book or a film or something, like it takes time, it takes energy, it often takes resources, it takes, planning, it might involve other people, who knows? And you might have to sell it to someone, so you've got to really be excited about it. You have to believe in it yourself, and it has to fit in. That's kind of where the big vision part, it has to fit in with like your larger plan for your life,
Yeah.
and your goals for your life, right? Like, oh, it takes this much time. It makes sense that it takes this much time because it makes sense for all these things. So there's that side, and then there's this audience side. So I think it's actually both. I think it's this balance between the two, and to do one or the other, to only say I wrote from my heart and no one read it, it's like, well, did you ever ask yourself if anybody needed to read this, or if this is the place where they are, or maybe they just
Yeah.
needed a different title because they don't know what you're talking about. Or people are like, I read all the books and I did all the things and I listened to the podcast and I did everything they said so that I would be successful, and it wasn't successful. It's like, well, do you care about what you're writing about? Do you, have any kind of passion about it?
Mm.
So it's both.
Even goes back to mythology. To me, it goes
Yes.
back to religion as well. It goes back to like,
Mm.
how do we explain the world around us?
And how do we do it in a way that other people can understand who haven't had a similar experience, right?
Yeah.
So in my personal public speaking and advocacy work, I talk a lot about domestic violence and coercive control. And that's a concept that a lot of people don't understand when you explain it to them technically. But if I
Mhm.
talk about the lethality of coercive control as being more lethal than carbon monoxide detection, or poisoning, people get that because we know enough about carbon monoxide poisoning and how it can make us sick and slowly kill us while all being invisible to our all of our senses, right? So it's
Yeah.
that building those analogies that helps people to understand these concepts and connect to them in a different way. Learning how to use your word real estate, that helps all of that, because so many people will go on and you're just sitting there kind of like, you're listening, you're like, oh, get to the point already, right? And so that was the other reason why my storytelling, my Saturday series has been so fun to write, because it's like, what is the device that moves this plot forward in an efficient way?
Oh gosh, it's such a challenge for folks to be able to do that, because on the one hand, we understand the importance of keywords, right?
Right.
Searchable terms, keywords, language that people immediately associate with the things that they're feeling or the things that they're searching for and what they really want. And so we have to play into that. So, but being able to use and play with language, number one, it takes practice. And having a thesaurus is a great place to start. But we really find a lot more depth in metaphor and in simile.
Mm.
Meaning, think about the other ways that you can say that. There's a really lovely quote, don't tell me that the moon is shining. Explain the reflection from
Mm.
from the pond, right? And how does that make you feel? And ultimately, when we focus on how do we feel about these things, what is it about honing in, right, that he could have expanded upon in terms of feeling complete, in terms of feeling satisfied, in terms of feeling, these other feelings that you may have. And so as you explore into what those feelings mean and what sort of a response you get from, mentally and physically to a situation, the more that you can kind of play around with that, the more that you're going to be able to really help people to understand what it is that
And
you are trying to convey to them and the emotion that you want them to feel with whatever it is that you're trying to sell to them.
The blogger in me and the memoirist in me wants to say, you should always speak from the heart and you should always be a person who is the same on paper as in person. But then I'm also thinking, as a communication director,
yeah.
but as a communication director, say if I'm writing something on behalf of a company, um, I want that the thing I write to be harmonious and with integrity to the organization, maybe not to myself personally. And that's the area where, like, um, you know, in thinking about different situations, it's
Yeah.
the same skill of telling a story, but maybe the perspective changes, because when I'm writing for myself, I am writing 100% from my own heart and perspective. And when I am writing on behalf of a company or an organization, yeah, I do want to be I do want to be the same of, as what that company's personality is.
Yeah.
So I guess it is the same. It's just that you're wearing a different hat
Yeah.
and you have integrity to the voice and the organization that you're speaking
Yes.
for.
You touched on it a little bit about the effort involved and that's why it's important that you care about it. And I kind of find myself in my own current state of paralysis,
Yeah.
because there are options now about where you put your idea.
Yeah.
Does it have to be in a book? Could it be a podcast, a series of essays on my Substack, a
Yeah.
keynote, or just let it go? Maybe it's a great idea. I like to talk about it, but I don't like
Right.
to market it. I don't like to sell it.
Right.
And it's not just about the storytelling. I could tell these stories all day long. It's about the effort I perceive as being involved on being successful within other formats. So, how do you work with someone who has that big idea that they love to talk about, they're super excited about, but they don't know what to do with it, or they see what to do with it and they're just not sure. And
Yeah.
and how do you help them crystallize where the
Yeah.
right path is?
Well, there's a bunch of steps, and it kind of goes from wide to
Break it all down in 5 minutes, Britt.
okay. So really that's where the big vision part comes, right? So you really because as you said, it takes so much time, right? And if it's someone who has a lot of ideas, they're getting stuck because they're trying to figure out one, what's the right one, which sometimes there is no right one. And they're getting stuck because it's like, well, if I did that, they're thinking their head's going down to like, well, then my life will be like that, or then my life will be like that, or then whatever. And they can't find one that feels quite right. So they just kind of circle round and round. So it's really starting with the bigger, it's sort of like, what's the bigger, let's say it's part of their work, right? Okay, so what's the bigger vision for your work? And there's a series of questions I ask, but let's just say it's kind of like you have to kind of start with your ideal because life is hard and complicated. And so we know plenty of the nitty gritty, but the ideal part is what energizes us. So you start there, right? And so let's say someone's like, oh, I have this idea, and it could be a book, it could be a thing. So you say, okay, what's your, big vision if this was a book? How would this look, right? Or if this is, or if you could just say, if this idea did everything you wanted it to do for you, for the world, for your life, what would that look like? And often when you start with that, if someone starts talking about it, you get a sense about it either could be something very concrete, like they're like, well, they automatically, they're like, it would be a book, and I would have a book tour, and blah, 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 blah. And you're like, there you go. And then you keep going. Or it could be something else that the person is like, well, what I really want is I just want this community because I just really want to talk to other people who are interested in this. It doesn't actually matter what form it is. Okay, what form would give you the most opportunity to have this community? Or, it's getting down to like, what is this thing that makes this person want to share this? And it's a little more internal, right? Because there's something that's making them come back to this idea over and over and over again. So once you get a little more into that and how it fits into everything, because then it's asking questions like, okay, if you wrote it, let's say the person was doing the book, you wrote it as a book, or you did something so you had a community around it, how would that fit with the rest of your life? Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so you get rid of a lot of stuff like that. That's one way. Another way to do it is to say, great, you have 4 ideas. Let's pursue them all, but slowly, right? So each week, I want you to do one small thing to each idea. And usually what happens is someone does it because they usually don't have 10. They usually have at most 5, maybe 4, usually 3. And usually if you tell them they have to do them, they're like, never mind. I'll get rid of one of those. So it usually comes down to 3. And if you're like, okay, this week you think it could be a podcast, take one step toward that. You think it could be a book, take one step toward that. You think it could be a stuff tag. And what usually happens as they slowly do that and it becomes real, they're like, I don't think I want to do that one. I don't want to do that one because I always tell this story very quickly about I wanted to be a massage therapist. I thought it was cool. And I thought I gave great back rubs. And then I took a massage class and I realized people took their clothes off that you didn't know you had to massage them. And I was like, that's disgusting. And that idea went away. So that's a very extreme example. But that's what it is. You sometimes, when you're so stuck and trying to figure it out, you do it. And then the second part is going back to audience, right? And so let's say instead you have five different book ideas. It's the same thing, but different books. That's when you're like, well, who's going to buy this? So then you're really, you want to write one of them. You're excited about all of them. So then, well, is there a market for this? Is there an audience for this? Oh, actually, this idea or these two ideas are the ones that at this moment in time would be the best thing to do. So it's again that balance of what you want to do and then what is needed at this moment. Also knowing that, especially right now, this moment changes constantly. So maybe this is a good time right now for this piece of content in this format. That doesn't mean 2 years in the future, it couldn't be in a different format, but we don't know what that looks like. So you could only make the best decision you can right now.
This is a really important question because the answer is all of the above. There are a lot of books out there that tell you how to write,
Yeah.
uh, that will talk about the structure, that will provide you with character worksheets so that you understand the backgrounds of your characters and all these things that you're supposed to do before you start writing. And those can be extremely helpful. I don't mean that they're not helpful at all, because they are very helpful. But not everybody's brain works like that. So I absolutely have authors who have the tiniest idea. I have a client who started a book because she could see a toddler. She could see a toddler, a very young child who's running across a meadow, and she's alone, and then she's found by a woman, and that's where the story started. Now, that's not the beginning of the story. That's not where the book starts, but that's where the idea kernel in her head started, was with just that vision. And so then she was able to sort of, like, in spirals, like, write
Wow.
around it. She created a whole thing. And so there are structures for people who like structure. There are many different structures that you can follow. Everybody's heard of the hero's journey.
Yeah.
There is another ancient story structure called the heroine's journey, which has nothing to do with gender, but is sort of the inverse of the hero
Mhm.
story, where the hero story is all about a journey towards a single person who is fighting against the evil or the bad situation. And the heroine's journey is about a person who starts alone and builds a community around them in order to defeat the bad guys.
Hmm.
So we have
Buffy the
sort of this.
Vampire Slayer. Heroine's
Yes.
journey.
Yeah. So we have that. We have there's a book called Romancing the Beat, which is all about how to write a romance novel. And it's about creating tension between characters, and that understanding how it is that they are coming together, where they find that they maybe want to be together versus the things that pull them apart. And you want to think about how you pull that tension all the way through. What's realistic about why people are together or not together. And it sounds very easy until you think about any person you know who's ever dated for any period of time, realizing that the number of questions and challenges that come out of just a normal life, and the things that we don't understand about ourselves,
Mm.
the ways that we don't know how to be partners, the ways, all the things that we don't know, and how that, really rises to the surface. Or whether the society around them. I have, the challenge of writing people that are not following the rules of society in some way, and how that affects the way that they interact with the story. But yeah, I have people who start with particular scenes, or have their favorite scenes. They have all these different things that they might write those things first and then figure out how they go together. But the end result, right? It doesn't make them more successful. It doesn't make them write faster. It doesn't make the all of that is sort of separate from the way that the story comes to you. So if any authors are out there, whether you're writing nonfiction or fiction, it's really okay to just start writing whatever is top of mind, whatever's in your head, and just start getting it down on paper, because
Mm.
that is, whether that those words end up in the book or not, that writing process is a very important element. To go back to the basketball idea, right? It may not be exciting to do dribbling drills back and forth across the court, but that is going to come back to you, and it's going to be important later. So whatever it is that you've written, that act of writing is a really important practice that you have to do. And so not every word that goes onto the page is going to be the final version. And that's one other thing that I think that is challenging sometimes for people that are starting out on a writing journey is just how many revisions are required in order to get the product that you want. It's absolutely okay to write the first version of the book that goes, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then that happened, and have that very basic, boring, uninteresting language. And then as you've got the story on the page, now you can figure out how to polish it and how to shine it up and how to make that better and where those metaphors are coming from and what is the theme that's going to, travel all the way through and how are you getting people from point A to point B. There's some really great, storytelling ideas and some tricks. And if you've done the process of writing a few paragraphs and writing a few scenes and maybe you're even 100 pages in and thinking, okay, where am I going with this? Understanding where your ending is going to look like is really going to help you get to that point, right? It's very much like you can go to a national park, you can go to Yosemite and meander around the meadow for a really long time. But if you don't decide that you want to get to the top of El Capitan, right? If you pick the top of El Capitan, you just okay, that's going to change the way that you are going to maneuver your way through the park. And so we always want to be thinking about it's absolutely okay to kind of get your feet under you and to kind of get some ideas and start putting some shape around what it is that you're doing, but eventually you do want to know where you're headed with this. And that's going to help you decide, how to finish it.
Yeah, I think curiosity. I'm going to go back to working as a journalist because I feel that a lot of my storytelling is very rooted in working as a journalist for many years. And as a journalist, you are always thinking about trying to see the world from a little bit outside of your own perspective. Like you are the one walking through the world, but you're also thinking actively about how would another person see this? Or what questions do I have about this? What makes me interested or what makes me wonder why things are the way they are? And I also wonder that for other people. Like am always thinking about like, oh, how would, for example, my parents see this? And my parents, like I mentioned, are first generation immigrants to America. And I think that's actually something that drew me into storytelling because in my life, I remember being a child and thinking, or even being a teenager and thinking, I've got to explain something to my parents about, like, we're doing this thing at school and it probably doesn't make sense to them. And they are maybe not going to be on board with it. And I would be always actively thinking, how can I tell this in a way that makes sense to somebody who comes from a different background? And I'm really thinking, like I'm not trying to misrepresent the situation. I just want to know, like, how do I tell a story to make it understandable to somebody else who doesn't already know about this and doesn't think about things the same way that I do?
But so tell me about this Saturday series. How do you pick are these just things you love, or are you in search of new things? Do you go out looking for new examples? Or are these things you watch them and you say, this is, I got to put this on my Saturday series. So tell me about the series and how you pick what you're going to talk about and how you keep it so tight. It's really tight, your newsletters. Like you make that point very what's the word I'm looking for? Succinctly.
Well, you got to, right? Because my biggest I've been in email marketing for almost 20 years. My biggest pet peeve are these long newsletters. So I want to make sure that I'm like capturing attention, making the point. I will if they're written well, I will read the whole thing. But so many of them, I'm like, I find myself skimming them really fast. Yeah. Not to discredit all the work that people put into really long newsletters, but it's interesting because I have. Well, I guess I'll just go back to how this all started. Was way back in my 20s, I was married, and the person I was married to wanted to be a screenwriter. And so all of our date nights were going to either the movies, baseball games, or live music. And so whenever we went to the movies, which was probably at least twice a week, sometimes 3 or 4 times a week,
Wow.
sometimes we'd see 2 or 3 movies in a day. Because he wanted to study, like, how are these written? How is this character developed? What is this? All these things. And so I have never seen a movie in a normal way for 20 some years now, because we would dissect all of the way that the film was created, from all of it. And so I remember seeing Monsters Inc. in the theater when it first came out, and the conversation we had in the car about how well this entire opening scene was set up. Like, it set up the story perfectly, it set up the characters. If you really pay attention, and when you know what happens later, like, everything is revealed actually in that first scene. And so it's just like, oh, this is really fascinating. So I got to thinking about it, 25 years later, at how well that also translates over into public speaking, and how we waste a lot of our word real estate trying to tell the story and get all the details in and do all this stuff. And it was like, no, how do we make this so that I can teach you, this is how you take this story idea and bring it over to your public speaking. So then I actually, the day that I had this idea, I was like, okay, the first one's going to be Monsters Inc. because I talk about it in every single course I do. It comes up when we talk about storytelling, about the setup and making sure that people understand the situation.
So you are one of our wisdom exchange experts who talks about something I find extremely intriguing, because I had a bit of a classical, I was a theater major, which meant not English literature, but, I read the Greeks and I read Shakespeare and I read, eras of theater, which is its own form of storytelling. And you tell us a little bit about these archetypes of narrative structure that you can help people learn about, and then also figure out how their story fits one of those structures. And why is that helpful?
hmm Um, so I find it helpful to look at different archetypes of stories because we each have so many stories to tell, especially when you get to the point in life where you have more experience and you've done more things. There's a lot of stuff you can say about yourself, but oftentimes you need to narrow down what you're going to say to be more effective in whatever situation you're in. So, for example, we hear, like, when we were in school, you learn about the different types of story, like man versus man, let's say woman versus woman, well, woman versus the world, woman versus nature, things like that. So, those are digestible and relatable ways to understand, kind of like a focus journey that you've been on. For example, you may go to a job interview and you need to introduce yourself. You may go on a first date and you need to introduce yourself, but you don't introduce yourself the same way in those two situations because they're really different situations. But
Yeah.
you're, also starting at that point, with like a brand new audience, but you want to reveal different parts of yourself for what's appropriate and applicable at the time.
These archetypes are helpful, and I can see how when you're doing
Mhm.
memoir or telling your own story, that you think of as a narrative, like telling a story about yourself. But how do you use these same kind of, what's an example of an archetype or two that you could use in service of, as you say, a job interview, or in service
Mhm.
of your CV or your website for yourself as a professional, or your, company? Like, how are you using these same skills in a professional setting
Mhm.
to stand out with how you talk about your work, your product, your service, whatever it is?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'm going to go back to my own experience because
Okay.
maybe that's a relevant way to talk about this. Um, I found that when I began looking to re-enter the workforce after not having, a paid job for some years, and I had a big gap on my resume and kind of some, you know, more unusual type, jobs that I found I wanted to be able to connect the dots. So I wanted to connect the dots and tell a story about myself to really emphasize that um, I had some, unique situations. I was raising a family. I was working in a career where, it's not that conducive to my situation in life. And perhaps I was living in a place where, traditional jobs in my field were not like super abundant, and I wanted a certain type of work-life balance. And so I found that as I'm, talking about this and speaking to people, there's a little bit of like a woman versus world type of narrative because I needed to explain that the traditional corporate, big work world wasn't necessarily conducive to, the kind of career and family life I wanted to have
And
and
woman
needed.
and woman versus world be like woman versus society, woman versus norms? Is that a sort of under
Yes,
that umbrella?
yes, yes. I think I would, classify my story as women versus society or women versus world, because there were situations that at the time didn't make it easy for me to have the kind of career in like, one job type situation. And so I had to go out and find multiple different part-time or freelance jobs where I could use my skills to do things that I enjoyed, that I felt like I was giving back and contributing to the world.
Mm-hmm. So how did you use, knowing that you were in that position, what were some of those dots that you connected for a prospective client
Hmm.
to hire you to say that what you really want is me
Hmm.
who's going to work for you fractionally or part-time or
Hmm.
freelance because I bring all of this to the table that you won't get with a traditional approach? Like how did you turn your what might have been considered your atypical needs,
Hmm.
your how'd you turn those into advantages?
Yeah. So I think I would often, for example, I did a lot of consulting for like small businesses and nonprofit organizations. And I would often lead with the fact that I worked as a journalist. And as a journalist, you're often very aware of and, curious about issues that are going on in society. So, for example, if I was talking to a nonprofit, I can pose myself as I'm used to investigating or digging into these types of subjects and work that you do as an outsider. And so, a lot of times people are, if you're running a company and especially like a nonprofit organization, you're thinking about like, how do I prove my value to the outside world?
Yeah.
And for me, I'm already thinking like I'm from the outside world. So, so that is a way that I, would pose my value as different than somebody who had a more traditional resume working within a lot of these types of organizations, in that I actually bring a diversity of viewpoints. I bring the viewpoint of working as a journalist. I bring the viewpoint of a person who is used to telling my own stories and writing personal narrative. And I'm also thinking about you and your company or organization and what you need. And I'm always approaching things from different points of view, which.
I think in a world where it is very hard to stand out, where people are just trying to keyword the hell out of their resumes to get past
Yeah.
AI resume readers. And if you actually get to talk to a human, that's not a very interesting way to talk about your journey, nor if the end that you have in sight is that you want this role or you want this gig,
Hmm.
then and then this happened and then that happened and then this happened. It's probably not the strategy to get to that end goal that you have in sight, and rethinking how you talk about yourself and sort of chunking together what are the lessons or what are the the skill growth, or what is, there are other ways to position your experience that is more of a journey,
Yeah.
that can resonate, and that people can feel, that they see the ending with you, because that's the whole thing about looking for a gig or a job or a contract. You want them to see an ending with you together, just like you want that. And so,
Yeah. Um, there's a internet term, main character energy.
yeah,
And I think that we all have to remember that we are the main character of our own story.
yeah,
And and so we have to know where our main character is going. What is this thing that you want? Is it the job? Is it a position? Do you
that's
want to
the
move
hardest
to a new
part,
place?
Jen.
Yeah. So you got to think about where it is that what is your goal? Like where do you want to be? And then you think, okay, where am I now? Because this is the other part, right? If I
Yeah.
want to have that, if I want to have a corporate VP position and I'm down here in like the manager level, I want to be thinking about what that career path is. But on a larger scale, right, we want to be thinking about our own lives, right? What is the life that I want to be living? And maybe that's more the conversation that you're having because it's
Mhm.
not about the job title, it's about the way that I want to be living my life. Does that involve a house with an ocean view? Does that involve quiet mornings where I'm able to sit and have a cup of coffee before my day starts versus a day that starts at 6 o'clock in the morning with meeting, right? Are those kinds of things that is that your goal? What does that look like for you? And then we have to remember too that even if you read one of those really big books, the 400, 500, 800 word, 800 page novels that are out there, that there's a lot of the story that's not on the page. And so there's an editing process that you have to go through with your resume, with your personal stories, and as you are presenting yourself to people who are going to be able to help you to get to whatever that goal looks like, there's an editing process that you want to be able to incorporate in terms of how does that appear. Resumes are a really good example. You have resumes of did this, did this, did this. But when you start changing that language to, I accomplished this, this is the difference I made in this company's, bottom line, or, um, you know, improved whatever. If when you start using those action words as opposed to statements of fact, then you start creating an emotional response in the person that is reading it. Eventually, when you get to that reader person, I know.
Yeah, yeah,
It's hard. It's hard out there for anybody that's looking for a job. My heart goes out to you. I know how difficult that is right now.
yeah.
Um, but and the challenge is because AI is doing a lot of the sorting process, right?
Mhm.
So you have to use those keywords. You have to do that initial run. But then think about what is the story that you're telling yourself about who you are and the things that you've accomplished. And a lot of us have a real struggle with being able to see that because we are more likely to remember the times that we failed versus the times that we succeeded. We're
Mhm.
more likely to remember the things that we got wrong versus the times that we made a change in somebody else's life and made them better, right? How did you contribute to the success of a project or a group or help to somebody else to shine? And how do you use that to shine a light on yourself? And these are all things that we would do with our main characters, right? In a
Yeah.
story. And you have to be the main character of your story. You have to be the one that is driving action. You have to have the agency to make the changes in your world and in your life that you want to be able to make. And if you're not able to make those changes just yet, start putting together, what are the scenes, what are the actions that you have to take in order to create that change that you want and to be the person that you want to be. And it's all about the stories that we tell ourselves as well as the stories that we tell other people.
Um, but I would say that it actually goes back to the beginning of audience, right? And so if we just think if we're going to actually be broad at this point to start with, people have no time. They have no concentration.
Yeah.
They're like reading things on phones. They are, scrolling, looking at headlines, looking at a picture. So I feel like you really need to keep that in mind. And
Mhm.
that we have in general gone past the point of people sitting around reading 2000 page 2000 words, this and that, and all the words you slaved over. And so if you don't really have the key point toward the top, they're not going to get it. So, and so there's that. That's just the broad. Then we go narrow and say, this is where you have to know your audience, because perhaps your audience are people who read like The New Yorker, or something like that. And if they are, then this is a long form audience, right? So that's the first part. Um, in terms of the mechanics, I actually think it's interesting you chose Twitter, because I think that that is a great exercise. Even if what you need to write doesn't have word limits, but to write it however you want, and then to say, realistically, I know my audience, and my audience has this much time in their day, and they have a job, and they have a family, and they, have all, and these other things they're probably reading. They could probably read at most 500 words. Like, we're just making something up here. How can I cut this to 500 words? Because then you have to, right? So that's one way to do it. I think it was actually Rita Aarons who long ago was one, just chop off the beginning. That's what Rita would always say. Because you're just getting
Wow.
started. You're like, blah, 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 blah. And you're like halfway through, and then you start writing about the thing that you
Oh my
actually meant to
God.
write about. And I do that all the time. And I find that constantly to be true, of just like chop it off. Um, so that's another one. I think another good question to ask yourself is, are these words for me? Are these words for them? And it's like, am I just enjoying the sound of my own voice, or am I
Yeah.
telling this story because I want someone to hear it? I mean, I'm just kind of making this up, but, or, let's say you're an organization. Are you just going into excruciating detail about your product, but like they don't care?
Yeah.
That's, who is this? Is this really for, like, you really got to, this is the audience thing. Like, who is this person? Are they reading
Yeah.
it on their phone in the grocery line, or on the toilet, or in bed? Are they reading in a book? How are they doing this? Who are they? And what is their personality? Is this something where like they just need that information fast? So, and you're making them read 5,000 words with no bolding and no indentation and no bullet points and no nothing. Like, they're never going to get through it.
I
So,
mean, if it's good enough for James Joyce.
yes. So, but that was a very long time
I
ago.
know. Maybe the
So,
nerdiest joke I've ever told, right there.
so that's what I would say
Yeah.
is, are you writing for the New York Times? Are you writing for People Magazine? Are you writing for, who are they writing for, what age, what reading level, what interests? If it's, let's say you're writing something like, I don't know, about birds for
Yeah.
like a birding magazine for birders, they're going to want to know every excruciating detail, right? Because
Right.
that's what it's about. But
Yeah.
if you're just writing an essay, like say a personal essay about birds, and the birds are a metaphor for something, and your audience is more, it's like your audience is women going through midlife, and the birds symbolize your senior parents or something, like they don't need all the excruciating
Yeah.
details about the birds unless it informs the metaphor. So
Yeah.
I would say the last part is, what is your objective in this piece of content, right? If we go back to the Buffy piece, it's like, oh, I just want everyone to have fun, or I want everyone to feel like they belong, or I want someone to take action on this, or I want someone to purchase something. That also informs the content, because if every piece of whatever it is not taking you to that goal, then it's extraneous.
Yeah. I was speaking to somebody recently, an intern I have who's working on essays for grad school applications. And she said, I have writer's block. I don't know what to write. And I told her, back when I was blogging a lot, and there were hot topics and things that were, coming fast and furious, and you wanted to comment on it, but also there was a sense of like sometimes I was kind of scared, or like I was
Yeah.
like, oh, I have to be really careful about how I'm going to say this, because, emotions are running high. People are, just kind of like reacting really quickly. And I would find myself holding back. And I had this thing I would do where I would tell myself, nobody's going to read this, but pretend you're talking this through with a friend, and you're telling your friend what you're thinking, and write it down like you're telling a friend that you're having a conversation about. And it can even be like, I don't really know how to say this, but I'm trying to say something, and write it as if you're talking to a friend without thinking, oh, I have to sound educated or I have to sound like official or anything like that. And then after you get your ideas out, then go back and then you edit and try to make the words sound more polished and, more to the situation that you're in. And then I would say, finally, um, read it out loud, like many people do. Read it, and then again, get that gut check. And does this sound like something you would say and that you would feel good about saying, and that, you're not saying something that, oh, I would say this when I'm typing at my keyboard because nobody's going to
Right.
be able to respond to me. But if I were speaking to somebody face to face, would I also say this? And that's
Right.
often a really good barometer of whether what you're writing is something that is truly resonating with yourself and something that you feel good about putting out to the public.
Britt, thank you. So we're at time, but we could go on forever. But thank you so much for sharing both your perspective as a writer yourself, but also in working with so many people who have these, really sometimes writing is a merciless
Yes.
a merciless taskmaster. And it's a struggle sometimes. And for some people, maybe never, it never is, but for most of us, even if we love it,
Yes.
you know.
Absolutely.
So I really appreciate both your broad perspective on it, but also some of the really specific, guidance and tactics you provided. I know I'm going to walk away and be like, I need to think about my audience more. You drummed that into my head, and I'm taking it.
Well, thank you. This was fun. I really appreciate it.
Tell people where they can find this newsletter I keep rhapsodizing about, and how they can support your work.
Yeah, so I actually, they can find it on my website at eunicebrownlee.com, and you are welcome to subscribe from there. I send it every Saturday morning, and I plan to do it. I probably have still 12 or 15 ideas, because even every week as I'm watching stuff or people are talking about things, I'm like, ooh, that's something I should look into. So the list keeps growing. I'm always also open to suggestions. If somebody really has a show or movie that they love and they want to dig into it, we can totally do that. That would be really fun. So
It has to be, it's TV or movie, not books.
I haven't dug into books just yet.
Well, because probably way more people watch TV and movies.
Yeah. Well, and I think that it's easier to connect the dialogue or the scene with TV and movies, but I am a bibliophile through and through, so I'm all about books. So I won't leave that on the table.
There's a format that a couple of great books have had this year in very different ways. So maybe just I want you to read these books so that I can get your perspective on it, because I have feelings. The first is This Death of the Author. It has a novel within the novel. It's about a novelist, and the novel within the novel is so good. I want to have that novel, but you don't get the full thing. You get but it's great. But the other one I read was Percival Everett's Erasure, which the movie American Fiction was based on, with Cord Jefferson as the director, and Jeffrey Wright starred in it, and it was nominated for a bunch of Oscars. I have not seen the movie. I understand they changed it a little, but it's got a novel within a novel, which is purposely and meaningfully very difficult to read, and not very almost unenjoyable to read, but it's making a point. And so these two books, I just really want you to read those books so we can have a conversation about them.
Ooh, okay. Sounds good. I've got a lot of train time coming up, so I can add those to my
Excellent.
to my digital library.
Excellent. All right, Eunice, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us this month. And for everybody, Eunice is one of our many very wise and generous Optionality members. So come check us out at optionality.life. We've relaunched in a new community space, and we're really looking forward to more conversations about storytelling and narrative arcs, because they're behind and underneath everything.
Everything. Stories are what connect us.
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me, Elisa.
Jen, thank you so much. I love the way, it's all so interconnected. Everything in life seems to eventually come down to stories, the ones we tell about ourselves, the ones we tell ourselves,
Yeah.
the ones we tell other people that, we want to tell to other people. And I think having that, and also thinking about the actual creation of the story, but the mindset and the everything that's around creating that story, what it results in. It's a universal part of life, and applying those principles to everything we're doing is really made me like, I'm going to like look at this transcript and be like, oh yeah, I need to start thinking about that. It's really, really very thought provoking for me personally. So I hope for everyone else out there.
I hope so. I mean, the thing is that we do have all of these stories, and we have all of these things that we want to accomplish. And we need to remember that there's a journey that goes along with all of those things. And journeys are hard. They're tough. Maybe you didn't pack right, and now you've got this heavy luggage or whatever it is that you're kind of bringing along on the journey. And so we always kind of have to keep that in mind. And one other thing that I'm going to say is that sometimes when you are on that journey, you might realize that you're headed in the wrong direction. We see this in books all the time, where, the ending we thought we were going to is not the correct one, and we have to make those changes. And I think that we all need to just recognize that there's a lot of power in being able to pivot. It's not giving up, and it's not quitting. It's being able to consciously and intentionally and purposefully choose the new goal, choose the different goal, and be able to work towards
something
it.
go,
Yeah. Let
you
it
were
go.
when you were talking about the journey and the luggage, I got a flash in my mind of a movie. I mean, I honestly it's been 40 years, The Accidental Tourist. At the very end, the William Hurt character, he ends up leaving everything behind except the picture of his child.
Yeah.
And because he's injured his back or whatever, and it's too heavy, it's too heavy a load. And he takes just the thing that is most important to him.
Just the thing that's most important. That's why you have to know your why. To come back around, you have to know why you're doing this. Why are you doing any of it? And, there's times when it's going to be real hard to do whatever it is that you're doing, but you're like, yeah, but this is important. I'm going to continue forward. I'm going to go through the difficult and the challenge and the hardness and the uncertainty, because it's worth it to work towards that goal. And that's just part of the deal.
Yeah. Thank you again, Jen. This was terrific talking to you.
Oh, I've had a wonderful time. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you so much for the series that you're doing and for everything that you're doing in Optionality. I'm very happy to have this conversation with you.
Grace, thank you so much for sort of giving us this kind of perspective from both a journalistic point of view, but also these archetype things. They always really fascinate me, but also that you're living this. I'm writing a memoir, I'm writing online, I'm doing communications for an organization. Like, you've got to think about it from a lot of different points of view. And, I think a lot of us have that in different areas of our life. So thank you.
Thanks for having me, Elisa. This was really great to talk.